What's up, guys? This is Keegan Russell, host of the KC Sports Authority podcast, and we are super excited for this one because it is Selection Sunday, and that officially means March Madness is kicking off. The NCAA tournament is just a few days away. All the selections have been made for the field, and we are going to break all those down today here on the podcast. I got Spencer Gray joining me, as well as JB. You guys remember JB? It's been a while since he's been on, but he was on our KU basketball episode back in the spring to kind of preview the upcoming year. So we're going to break all that down, obviously talk about how the bracket looks for KU, being the number 1 seed in the West, the number 3 seed overall. We'll talk about that, give you our reactions and thoughts on how KU definitely got screwed in this Selection Sunday this year. Also on top of that, I want to throw this out to you guys, and if you're watching on YouTube later or you pay attention to any of our social media pages, we are going to do a fantastically fun bracket challenge this year, which we're super excited about. First time doing this, of course, on the podcast, and if it has a huge hit, obviously we'll keep it going. But this year we're doing a free bracket challenge to anybody that wants to join. You get 1 entry per person. It is over on ESPN. All the details will be posted if you're watching on YouTube in the comment section below. And if not on YouTube, then check us out on Twitter and on Facebook at KCSA Pod. You'll see the tweet pinned to our profile with the link to the bracket challenge. The exciting part is not only is it free, but you can also win free stuff. So first place this year is getting a $100 gift card to Rally House. That can be used at any Rally House in America. So if you're not here in the Lawrence area where we are, no worries, you can use it anywhere. Super excited for that. That is the first place winner. Second place is going to get a $50 gift card to Jefferson's. Again, you can use that at any Jefferson's location. And then third place will get a $25 gift card to Johnny's Tavern. So feel free to join that bracket challenge. Find us on Facebook and Twitter. You'll see the links to that. Or if you're here watching us on YouTube later, you'll see that in the comment section. Would love for you guys to join as many as possible so we can have some fun competition. We too, as the podcast, will have an official bracket, which we are going to go through together here on this episode here. We'll get to that later in this episode, and that'll be posted to get everyone's thoughts on. So please join the podcast bracket challenge with us. It'll be a lot of fun. Again, 1 entry per person, but it's free. So share it with your friends. There'll be a link posted. Share it with anybody, and let's have some fun. All right, guys. Selection Sunday. The committee made their picks, and if anyone was paying attention to it, it sounded like some of these picks were made probably before that Houston game today and even the Purdue game this afternoon too. So let's just kind of dive in. First thing right off the board, Alabama gets the number 1 overall seed. Of course, they won the SEC championship, which was a pretty intense SEC tournament this year. Pretty solid conference overall. But Alabama gets the number 1 overall seed. A lot of people thought Kansas was still going to end up there, given the fact that they had the NCAA record for quad 1 wins at 17. And that was shattering the record before. Turns out, though, the committee had already had their decisions beforehand. They've liked Bama for weeks, and that's just how it went. So let's just start there. Spencer, let me kick it to you first. Thoughts on Bama being the number 1 overall seed versus Kansas or Houston, Purdue, whoever else?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. If it was anybody that wasn't Kansas, I'm fine with Alabama out of anyone. I think Purdue is a little bit shaky. I don't think the Big Ten was as good as it has been in years past. And obviously Houston, doesn't play in, I would say, a very powerhouse conference. So I would be cool with Bama if it wasn't Kansas. That being said, I think if we win against Texas, I think we have a better argument for the number 1 overall seed, but we didn't look particularly great even without McCullough and Self on the sideline. So, I'm obviously frustrated about the Houston thing, but Bama, I'm more okay with.
JB, do you think Bama is the consensus best team in the country this year? Is this a year where the true number 1 seed is represented?
You know what? I'm going to say yes. I think when it all comes down to it, what I've noticed in particular about Alabama is their consistency in and I think resiliency are the 2 biggest words that come to mind. Now I've watched a few of their games. Especially I've tuned into the ones where it looked like they were about to lose, and I've seen them come back. So they have this resiliency to them that kind of mirrors the resiliency that Kansas had last season. And of course, Kansas ended up winning the national championship, as we all know. So that's a little scary in my mind. SEC is a great conference. We can't downplay that. So it makes a lot of sense. This year was interesting because I think more often than not, maybe it was because of the record of quad one wins, but I kept hearing quad one wins all over Twitter all year long. And it really, really ramped up, of course, in the last few weeks. And you got to think, wow, if this is something that I'm hearing about on Twitter all the time, maybe the committee's going to really pay attention to that. And maybe they did, maybe they didn't. It kind of sounded like they didn't, especially when they explained their reasoning for putting Houston over Kansas in the overall seeding. It kind of made sense from their explanation, but whether or not I agree with it, that's a different story. I think Alabama still overall makes sense for the number one, but Kansas definitely had an argument, and we can't ignore that.
I do think this is a year where you could argue probably 3 to 4 teams, honestly, for that number one spot. I think all 4 of the number one seeds had a good shot at getting that. It just definitely felt like the last couple of days and hearing different analysts and especially Joe Lunardi talk about Kansas just had enough on their resume to show that they should be the number one overall seed, regardless of what was going to happen in the Big 12 conference championship. And I think most KU fans, we could sit here and say we felt pretty comfortable, even after that 20-point blowout, that we were going to be the top overall seed. We were going to be in the Midwest region, have home field advantage, be in Kansas City to go to another Final Four. And that just was not the case. You know, the committee picked Alabama, and I can certainly understand why Alabama won their conference tournament. They've also been one of the most consistent teams all year. Even though I don't think any team stacks up resume-wise with Kansas, I think Alabama probably had the next best candidacy for it just because of the way they play and how consistent they've been all year. And they've had some pretty big wins. But definitely surprised that we did not finish as the top overall seed, let alone the number 2 overall seed. So let's talk about that. Houston over Kansas. Houston gets the number 1 seed in the Midwest region. And I think that was the most shocking thing of this entire Selection Sunday. You even heard it on the broadcast. Seth Davis was pretty shocked. Jay Wright was shocked. And they kind of thought, Kansas had the better resume because of those quad 1 wins. So JB, you were talking about the importance of quad 1 wins. Do you think the fact that Kansas did not get the number 2 overall seed, despite having the most quad 1 wins, and if you're watching on YouTube right now, you'll see the image of Houston versus Kansas resume, and Kansas definitely has the advantage in quad 1 wins there. They talked about quad 1 wins all year being significant and being important, and then we get Selection Sunday, and we see that literally didn't play a factor, it seems like, in KU being a higher seed than Houston. How on earth did the committee pick Houston over Kansas?
It's a great question. The general explanation that we got on air was that it had to do more with how competitive Houston was in their losses as compared to Kansas. And I get that, right? Kansas has a blowout loss to TCU in our own building. And of course, the 20-point loss, 20 plus to Texas. I mean, that's not looking good. And that one game alone, I feel like that one game alone started the entire conversation of maybe Texas should be the 4th overall 1 seed. And I was not hearing anything about that all season long. So that was a little bit shocking. And it was just it was rough to see. Now, when it comes to quad 1 wins, I understand why we talk about it a lot more now. I mean, it really speaks to your strength of schedule. And I think Houston had a pretty easy route all year. We've all talked about that.
Houston on record, excuse me, they had the 96th ranked strength of schedule compared to KU's number 1 overall.
That is absolute insanity. And to see, I know their record is better than ours, but not by a lot. And when you if you put Houston in the Big 12, which they will be, I think things are definitely going to be changing as long as we can keep our momentum going into next season. But one of the things that I really noticed was I saw it on Twitter. I retweeted it a while back. I'd have to go digging for it. But the last 5 seasons, I think it was the team that had the most quad one wins that ended up winning the national title. Of course, Kansas had the most last year and ended up winning. Baylor the year before that. I think it also mentioned Kansas had the most in 2020, but the tournament was canceled. Back when Virginia won the national title, they also had the most quad one wins. So especially over the last 5 years, the quad one win metric has been very, very important. And if you look at the last 5 years and that statistic is true, and the most quad one wins goes to the national champion, wow, you got to think KU has an amazing shot at this. And to think they set the record and be third overall just doesn't really compute. If you set everything aside, it doesn't compute. But I think the committee sometimes gets in their mind that record really stands, and it shouldn't. But Houston is a very solid team. It can be argued both ways, but it definitely kind of irked me and plenty of other Kansas fans.
Yeah. Spencer, do you believe the committee got this one wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think they definitely got it wrong, and I feel bad because a lot of people, a general consensus was, why do we bother scheduling such a tough non-conference schedule when we could just play a bunch of Division II teams and have the best record and be the number one overall seed. And you see it every year. Houston isn't the first team to be like this. Gonzaga is usually the team that is playing in the Mountain West or their conference and running it through the entire season. Then they get to March Madness, they play actual teams that have played a really tough schedule all year, and that's why they don't have a title. That's why they don't win it all in March. And so I definitely I was expecting some sort of argument from the NCAA as to kind of justify what they were doing, but I was not satisfied with it whatsoever. And I just to me it's like the quality of losses. I don't really understand how that's a justified manner to judge a team. It's like, if we're playing better competition, yeah, we're going to have some worse losses out there. I just don't really get that whatsoever. If to me, a close loss to a very much worse team is not the same thing as us losing, by 13
to a top 10 team.
Really qualified, to a qualified, Big 12 team like Texas. So yeah, I wasn't happy with it, like most of us.
Yeah, and when Chris Reynolds came on the show with them, Seth Davis asked them, how on earth, what did you guys think about, why was it Houston over Kansas? We disagree with you. Kansas has a better resume. And it was just baffling, the crappy response he gave us of, oh, well, they competed hard all season and, they were missing their star player in their conference tournament. So, we had to consider that. And then they were like, well, what about Kansas? They didn't have their head coach. We also didn't have Kevin McCullough in last night's game. And the fact that they said, outside of quad one, they looked at quad two, and Houston's quad two for them was impressive. KU didn't really have many quad two games because all of our games were quad one games. And they took that bigger picture and said Houston played so hard in all these other games, and even the 2 games that they lost. Now, I will give Houston credit. Having 2 losses on the season is pretty solid. But they did play the 96th best strength of schedule, which is nothing to get exciting about. I mean, really their best competition all year was Memphis, and the 3 games they played with Memphis have been fantastic. But they said Houston, basically played hard, and that their overall quad 1 and 2 versus KU's quad 1 and 2 was more impressive, even though they basically had to say Houston's quad 1 and 2 wins combined was more than KU's quad 1 win. So I could kind of understand if you took Houston out of the equation. Let's say Houston had 5, 6, 7 losses too. I could understand maybe a little bit more, because you're looking at a Kansas team that does have 7 losses on the year, and that's kind of a lot for a number 1 seed. But majority of those losses were against top tier talent, not only in the best conference in America, but teams that were in the top 25. You've got 3 or 4 losses there that are top 25 teams at any given point of the season. And the fact that that was overlooked and Houston got the excuse of, oh, well, we considered the fact that they didn't have Marcus Sasser for this game, and we basically determined that they played hard enough all year. It was just stupid, and I know we're not going to get a true answer. I wish we could have gotten a good reaction from, well, hopefully from Bill Self at some point. But even just Norm Roberts today on the fact that they got overlooked. I know if you guys, I didn't catch all of it, but Jalen was on ESPN. They were talking about it, and you could just see on his face that it was, yeah, we got robbed. We've got a chip on our shoulder. NCAA, look out. We're coming for you. So, which leads me to this thought of potential conspiracy. KU wins the national championship last year, coming on the heels of NCAA investigation. Bill Self still says, screw you, NCAA. We're going to win it anyway. Some conspiracy theories already going out there that this was the NCAA's way of making it even tougher on us because we, gave them the middle finger last year. I don't know if that's to be true, but it is pretty evident that KU has the hardest path to the championship from the 1 seed perspective. So let's kind of look into the brackets here, talk about some of the big time matchups. Let me swap screens. Let's start with KU's bracket because I do think they have the toughest. And if you look at the KenPom ratings, KU has the highest ranked number 2 seed with UCLA in their bracket. The top 4 seeds overall had the lowest ranking of the 4 combined regions, again saying that it was the toughest bracket. But KU gets Gonzaga as the 3 seed, UConn as the 4 seed, which already right there, that's a pretty tough top 4, given what the rest of the field have. But not only that, they have a pretty solid 5 seed in St. Mary's, who maybe they're overrated because they don't play a lot of competition, but they're still ranked as a 5 seed. Then they've got TCU as the 6 seed, which TCU could very easily have been a 3 or a 4 seed. Had Mike Miles not been hurt a little bit more in the season. And then the one that I'm really looking at here is I think they have the most impressive 8-9 matchup of the entire tournament. I mean, you're talking Arkansas and Illinois, who both at times were top 25 teams throughout the year, who are very, very solid squads. Arkansas was incredible. They've had a couple of really good games. Horrible matchup for KU, which we'll get into. But I just look up and down those top 10 seeds there have to be the most impressive. So when that bracket was unveiled, what was the first thoughts going through each of your guys' minds?
I'll start us off on that. I think for me, as I'm watching the Selection Sunday show and watching the previous 2 brackets being filled out, I will point out I hadn't seen Kentucky yet. I had not seen Duke yet. I hadn't seen Gonzaga yet. Of course, Gonzaga ended up in our bracket. But I started to think of all the names that I hadn't seen and starting to think it's going to be a gauntlet. And so I think, to be honest, my first impression was I'll take it. I mean, I'll take it. Now, looking at KenPom, it makes that story a little bit sour because, as you did mention, we have a tough 2 seed. We have a tough 3, a tough 4. But I think in the grand scheme of things, what I looked at mostly was, okay, I'm scared of a potential matchup with UCLA, or I don't want to say I'm scared of Gonzaga because I always rag on Gonzaga for their conference that they're in, and I want to just take it to them in the tournament. But if we had run into UCLA, Gonzaga, TCU, these are all teams that I would be worried about beating us, especially TCU, who's already beaten us once. But they're all on the opposite side of that bracket. So when you look at us, if we do make it to the Elite Eight, we'd only have to face one of them, assuming one of them makes it all the way through, which is highly plausible, of course. So, looking at our bracket, I think if we get past the first weekend, we can easily make the Elite Eight. I'm not, maybe I'm too overconfident, but I think Elite Eight is a very, very big possibility. Sweet 16 matchup wouldn't scare me no matter who it's against. And so I'm optimistic, but I'm just trying to contain my optimism a little bit. This is March Madness, and teams don't repeat championships quite often. So, I've seen a lot of talk about UConn being the team that could knock us off before we even get to that point. So it's a thought, but I think overall I am pretty excited.
Spencer, how about you? What were your first thoughts seeing our gauntlet of a bracket?
Yeah, so John brought the positivity, so I'm going to bring the mood down, and I'm going to talk about all the things that worry me. I definitely think there always is a scenario they could have been worse, but we did draw a really tough bracket. Just a couple of things to point out. I'm terrified of playing number 8 Arkansas because they were preseason SEC. To win the conference, they have Nick Smith and Anthony Black, 2 lottery picks on the squad, and that would be our second round matchup. And then aside from that, UCLA is also a very scary team. They have Amari Bailey, Jamie Jaquez. I mean, they got a good squad, and they got some players coming back from even the Final Four run a couple years ago. UConn is, I think, I'm going to butcher this, Ken Palm's number 4 overall team, I think. And then the 5th seed, St. Mary's, is Ken Palm's number 11 overall seed. So we got quite a bit. It's a really deep bracket. TCU, I mean, we've played them pretty well during the regular season, but again, like you said, they probably should have been seeded a little higher. So I think them as a 6th seed could definitely go a little far. I also don't want to say I'm afraid of Gonzaga because I also talk a lot of trash on Gonzaga. But I don't want to play Drew Timme. I don't want to have to, see KJ and Uday get into foul trouble the entire game. So there's a lot of potential problems. However, I do think it's plausible to see us winning. I don't think that that's a outrageous take. And I think we should be the pretty popular pick to come out of the bracket, even given all the challenges. But to be honest, the part that I'm most scared about, I don't want to lose in the second round to Arkansas. That's the big thing. I'll take a Sweet 16 loss, Elite 8 loss. I don't want to lose in the second round again because that always kind of hurts. But I don't think that's going to happen. When I'm making my picks, I'm not going to have KU lose that early.
According to DraftKings right now, UCLA is actually the betting favorite to come out of our bracket, just slightly ahead of KU.
Interesting.
Those odds have changed a lot in the last hour, but UCLA started out as the favorite. KU second, Gonzaga third, UConn fourth. It's kind of rotated around. I think though, of all the brackets of the 4 regions, I think this is one that you could tell me 6 different teams are going to come out, and I wouldn't argue with you for any of those top 6 seeds. I could even see a scenario, and this would be a little bit of March Madness, miracle talk, but if Rick Pitino just goes crazy because he's a fantastic coach, and Iona just rattles off a couple wins. But my initial thoughts, pretty much like you guys, as a typical Kansas fan. Now, let me say this from the start. First off, we are spoiled Kansas fans. We have not been anything lower than a 4 seed in like a billion years. In the Bill Self era, he's never been below a 4 seed. We haven't missed the NCAA tournament in like 40 years. We are expected to be a 1 seed pretty much every year. And even in the year where we don't get the number 1 overall seed, we're still sitting here upset about where KU got ranked compared to other teams in the league. So let me start there, because other fan bases, I do think, have some gripe they could have about not being a 1 seed. I think Texas easily could have been a 1 seed. UCLA easily could have been a 1 seed. So let's just put it into perspective how spoiled we are. The fact that we're a 1 seed again, considering that this maybe to Kansas fans isn't our best team we've seen in a while. The fact that we're still a 1 seed, even with 7 losses, is a lot to speak into. So let's get that out of the way first. Still an impressive season. 1 seed. You'll always take a 1 seed over not being a 1 seed. That being said, my initial reaction was, son of a gun, the stupid freaking NCAA is trying to yank one over us. They're trying to get back at us for something. They're mad we won the championship last year after the allegations and violations and whatnot. And man, they screwed us over. That is also a pretty typical Kansas response. I think most years we look at our bracket and we're like, oh my gosh, why did we get paired up with so-and-so? But this year, I do think we have a lot to gripe about because we got matched up with UCLA, who arguably, again, could have been a 1 seed. They're the best ranked number 2 seed in the history of the tournament, according to the new Ken Palm ratings and quad 1 wins and all that. So in recent metrics, they're the best number 2 seed we've seen in the bracket in a long time. not only are they the 2 seed, if they happen to make the Sweet 16 Elite Eight, they are basically playing within 2 hours of their home in Las Vegas. So they're, Southern California. Vegas is not that far away. Whereas the 1 seed who's supposed to get the fun, being the 1 seed and have some advantages, has to travel. I think it's like 16, 17 hours to Vegas from here. So that's disappointing. Then you get 3 seed Gonzaga, who is not a good matchup for us because of the size they have down low. They too also in the West Coast, so they kind of get the home field advantage. So that was kind of frustrating. Then you get the 4 seed UConn, who is a very good team, and I wasn't disappointed they were in our bracket, but they are a team that does not match up well against us because of their speed and athleticism. Most of KU's losses this year have come against teams that out-rebound us, outwork us, more athletic, quicker, faster, all that combined, and that's definitely UConn. Then I'm not even going to talk about St. Mary's because I think St. Mary's is an anomaly. They're a really good team, great program, but they don't play anybody. And so anytime they get in the tournament, we see that the competition brings them back down. But then you get TCU as the 6 seed. There were 2 Big 12 teams that I said, please, for the love of God, do not end up in our bracket. That was Texas and TCU. Thankfully, we did not get Texas as the 2 seed. That would have been awful. But TCU is a 6 seed. They are probably on paper as talented as us, and I think you could argue at times a better team than us. So the fact that they're the 6 seed, again, we wouldn't see them till potential Elite Eight matchup, but that's another team that is a horrible matchup for us. Then we finally get to that 8-9 matchup with Arkansas and Illinois. First off, that's going to be an incredible game to watch. You got 2 teams, one that's got a lot of size, very well coached, good defensively, can score a lot. And then you've got an Illinois team who's been pretty inconsistent this year, but has the talent capable of winning. And they also have pretty good guard play, and that's what you need in March. And they've got a couple of guys that KU's seen before. So you just know, typical March Madness fashion, if we match up with Illinois, Matthew Meyer's going to go off and hit like 7 threes in the first half, and that'll be typical. If we get the matchup with Arkansas, Arkansas has so much size. They play fast, super athletic. That scares me a lot. So initial reaction was, son of a gun, this is terrible. Hate the bracket, hate the matchups. We got fleeced on this. However, I don't remember which analyst it was that was talking about it, but they're like, don't get too upset, KU fans, because what happens in March happens to everybody every year. This is a tough bracket. Everyone's going to eat each other up. We only, like JB, like you mentioned, we really only have to face the top talent if we get to the Elite Eight, if we make it that far. So Gonzaga, we don't have to worry about them until the second weekend. UConn might not have to worry about them for a couple rounds. So that is, I think, one bright spot to take away, is that we don't have to face the best right away, and that the bracket, the way it's set up, actually might be advantageous to us later because a couple teams could beat each other out. Of all those teams, the team I want to see the least in the Elite Eight, I think, is UCLA, just because of their play style. I think we actually match up pretty decently with them. But they can shoot well, they spread the floor well, and that's going to be a home environment for them. So I definitely don't want to see that matchup. But overall, when it comes to winning a championship, you should expect to have to face the best teams in the country. And so if KU is able to pull off a repeat again this year, then this would definitely be one of the more impressive championship runs, just considering who they have to go through. But overall, I'm not too worried about it. I think if we do what we need to do, we play our game, the rest will kind of work itself out. Again, so we don't want to make too many more predictions there because we're going to run through our brackets here in a few minutes. But let's just kind of look at a couple areas of the bracket too. Looking at it, who do you guys think has the easiest path as a top 1 or 2 seed in the tournament to get to the championship? Whoever wants to go first.
I'll start us off, I guess. Is it really bad of me just to say Alabama? I mean, I'm going through the bracket just off of first impressions, and I'm thinking to myself, Alabama, of course, with how good they've been and everything we've said about why they deserve their number 1 overall seed. I mean, they're a tough team. Certainly, we're going to be looking at that 8-9 matchup and thinking, okay, West Virginia, they're in the Big 12. We're in the Big 12. We like to rep Big 12, and we like to think the West Virginia would get them problems. which I do think they could. They're very athletic and they're tough. They're tough and gritty. But if you get past them, I just don't really see anybody taking them out other than maybe Baylor. But then again, what if Baylor just lays an egg? I mean, I don't know. I don't
Which
know
they've
if
done a lot of times in the Scott Drew era,
they have. Now,
outside of their championship run.
Baylor has disappointed me. Of course, they just recently won a national title, but they have disappointed me in March Madness time and time again. I don't know why. Honestly, the whole Big 12 has disappointed me time and time again. And in this year, when Big 12 is as good as it's ever been, you got to think Baylor might meet Alabama in the Elite Eight. Um, First impression bracket, I might have had Baylor in my Elite Four or Elite Four, Final Four. But what is I don't know. What do we think that's actually plausible? Maybe. I mean, it's a lot of questions, but I think Alabama's the answer here. Kansas is going to obviously have a tough spot. We just talked about that. Houston, I think, could definitely get exposed. And then when it comes to Purdue, Purdue always does what Purdue does, and they choke. So I'm going to Alabama here for my answer.
Yeah, I've actually got Purdue losing in the second round to Memphis. That's my biggest upset of the bracket so far.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm looking it over. I think Purdue has a pretty high likelihood of losing early. They got a couple blue bloods in there. They got Duke, they have Kentucky. Our pals at K State at the 3 seed, who've had a great season. I think they're a good team.
Yeah,
I
shout out
think,
Jerome Tang. Not bad
yeah,
for his first year. Going from
not bad at all.
projected 10th
3 seed.
in the conference to a 3 seed NCAA tournament. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
no, absolutely. And so between Alabama and Houston, I definitely see I see the Alabama argument. I don't think they necessarily um, have a whole lot of teams to worry about. I think Arizona is a really good 2 seed. I will say that they're a really good team. I might honestly have to say Houston. Nothing really jumps out at me in terms of their side of things. Obviously, Texas plays well against us, but I think Houston is a slightly better matchup for them. I'm not seeing a whole lot of up and down talent here. I actually have Miami losing as a 5 seed. Um, Indiana, I think, is a really good 4 seed. I will say that. But outside of that, I'm not seeing a very tough path for them, especially if we see some upsets in the early rounds. So I think I'd say Houston, the Midwest, the one we should have been in. So that's
Mhm.
nice. I think I'll keep that as my answer.
I will say, even though I do think KU has the toughest bracket, I think overall the committee actually did a fairly decent job as far as making each bracket relatively competitive compared to the next. And what I mean by that is I don't think any 1 seed really has an easy path this year. I think, yes, you could argue Alabama and Houston probably have the best chance, but if you look at Alabama, I mean, they probably have the best player on their side of the bracket and Brandon Miller for sure. Um, but they still have Virginia. Virginia can slow just about any team down, and if they keep anybody below 55, they have an excellent chance of winning. Baylor's got the best backcourt probably in the country, trio of guards, and if those guys are all hitting, they could take on anybody. Um, I think even Missouri as a 7 seed, they have enough to kind of make some noise to make it a tough game. And of course, Arizona is a very, very capable 2 seed. They've got a lot of size down low, a lot of experience. So I don't think that's an easy region at all. And then you look at Houston. Houston probably up there with one of the better players in the conference. I think you could argue, or on their side, I think you could argue Texas might be the most talented team, top to bottom, in that side. But even Miami, Miami is a team that if they don't get upset in the first round, they can score a ton of points. So if they get hot, they could easily, be a stumbling block for Houston. Iowa, Auburn, even though Auburn kind of slid down the rest of the year, I mean, that's a Bruce Pearl team that they're going to show up. They're going to be competitive. Indiana, like you mentioned, Spencer, I think Indiana is a very underrated 4 seed. They have one of the best players in the country in Jackson Davis, and I think he could easily compel them up. Then you talk about Iowa State. Iowa State doesn't do anything amazing, but they're just so gritty and make the game so uncomfortable for you. They could be a tough out. And then Xavier, very good 3 seed there too. So I don't think either one of them have a super easy path. And then you go down to Purdue's side. Purdue's got Memphis as a strong 8 seed. I was watching that game today, and I think Kendrick Davis is one of those guys who's got March written all over him. He's the prototypical Mr. March kind of guard. So they could easily do something there if they can find a way to score without getting in front of Zach Edey. Duke is a 5 seed. Give Duke whatever crap you want to. They actually ended up the year pretty solid overall. Had their stumbling blocks early, but they were pretty consistent down the stretch, and I think they're playing their best basketball right now. Tennessee may not be playing their best basketball right now, but still a Rick Barnes team in the tournament. They're going to give a lot of noise. And, of course, Kentucky, even as a 6 seed, they started putting things together at the end of the season. K-State, very capable 3 seed. I don't know if K-State has the size to match up well against Kentucky if they get to that stage, but they certainly have the guard play, and Keontae Johnson is almost a walking bucket. And then, of course, you got Marquette and Shaka Smart, who might be one of the hottest teams in the country right now, making the most noise. They kind of really steamrolled the last half of their season in their conference tournament to work their way up. So I think overall it's a pretty well-matched bracket from top to bottom. I think this is a year where there's probably 8 to 12 teams you could argue winning the whole thing, just how the bracket shakes out. But a lot of ways we could go. So that being said, let's actually go through and build our bracket. So that was our reaction to Selection Sunday. To see our official podcast bracket for the podcast bracket challenge, you'll have to join us in the next episode.